tonight. And this panel is the Inhumanity of Detention. And I will introduce our panelists briefly. Amilcar Valencia, who is the executive director of El Refugio in Lumpkin, Georgia, and then Pedro and Emily Guzman, a couple who will share their own story about the horrors of going through the immigrant detention process. This is a joint effort of Judea Reformed Congregation here in Durham, North Carolina, both our social action and adult education committees. We received a very generous grant through the Religious Action Center of the Union for Reformed Judaism from the Gilbert and Eleanor Kraus Initiative for Refugee and Immigrant Justice. Thank you to the folks who are participating, and to Cornelio Campos, a wonderful artist who's an immigrant himself, who has provided the art that is in the background of these slides. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our Director of Congregation Music and Community Engagement, Alan Friedman, for a little blessing and intention setting. And I'm hoping in that Alan will at least say a silent blessing for all of our internet access so that we can have an uninterrupted hour and a half together. Alan?
Thanks, Randy, and thank you for the work you're doing tonight. Good evening, everyone. Buenas tardes. It's good to be here with you, even if we can't be together in body, to get here doing this work together in spirit. I want to start off our evening by framing a little bit from the Torah, from the book of Genesis, the story of Abraham and Sarah. God appears to Abraham. He was sitting at the entrance of the tent as the day grew hot. Looking up, he saw 3 men standing near him. As soon as he saw them, he ran from the entrance of the tent to greet them, and, bowing to the ground, he said, "Friends, if it is all right with you, do not go rush ahead and pass me by. Let me bring you some water, bathe your feet, and rest under the tree. And let me go get you something to eat so that you may refresh yourselves. Then go on, seeing that you have come this way." And they replied, "Go ahead. We are grateful." And we know there is so much work for us to do, but that knowing that our ancestors as a model have welcomed the stranger with water and food and shelter, that we too are grateful for the work of El Refugio. And we know that we have so many people that we must greet with open arms and open hearts, whether they be angels or people just like us. We know that the time is now to act, and the time now is to listen and be empathic. And we're grateful for all of you being here tonight to learn from our teachers, Amilcar, Emily, and Pedro.
Thank you, Alan. So a nice way to get started. So again, for those of you joining late, my name is Randy Chambers. I'm a member of Judea Reformed Congregation in Durham, North Carolina. I'm going to be in the background mostly as our moderator tonight. Just to tell you a little bit about my own engagement on this work, I've been involved in immigrant work really since I was a small child growing up in a heavily Salvadoran refugee community in Washington, D.C. 40 some odd years ago. But I'm particularly pleased to be part of this group and really kind of humbled to be in the room with them. I first met Emily when she and I were arrested about 2 years ago, trying to prevent the abduction and deportation by ICE of an immigrant from Mexico who had taken refuge in a church that our synagogue and other folks in the community were helping to support. And then Amilcar was gracious enough to provide hospitality to a group of folks from our congregation that included my 17-year-old daughter and I about a year ago, when we made the trek down to Lumpkin, Georgia, where Stewart Detention Center that he'll talk about tonight is located. And so to see the hospitality that that organization provides to immigrant families, and again, you'll hear from all 3 of our panelists tonight about that. Judea Reformed Congregation in Durham has been working on immigrant and refugee rights for a long time. We've partnership with CWS and Immigrant Solidarity Fund to support immigrants in our community. As I mentioned, we were very active in supporting Samuel, who was in sanctuary in a church about 2 miles from our congregation until the time that he was abducted and deported by ICE. And then we organized a group trip of many of the folks who are actually watching this panel tonight joined us as we made a pilgrimage down to to Stewart to see the detention facility in Lumpkin. And I say pilgrimage not as a place to worship, but as a place to understand and be in solidarity with. The purpose of this session is really to help those of you and those of us in this community, Jew, Gentile, and non-believer alike, to see the realities facing immigrants in detention, and particularly given all the noise in the world right now, to remind ourselves that this system continues unabated and really unchecked. And then the second thing is to make sure that we give you something to take away from this, ways that you can take action to support detained immigrants and their families and advocate for social change. Just one other point of personal privilege. At a session that we had a couple of years ago, we passed out pins that said, "My people were refugees too." And I carry this pin with me, not really to share with other people that my people were refugees too, but as a reminder to myself that I'm only here in this country in a place that is relatively safe for my Jewish family because somebody provided the kind of shelter that Alan described. And so I think it reminds each one of us of our own humanity to have something like this that tells us that we were protected along the way by someone who welcomed us when we were the stranger. So with that, I'm going to introduce our panelists and get this kicked off. We're really excited to have all three of them here today. They can share a lot about what's going on in detention, and particularly here in the southeastern United States. Amilcar, and then a family who's actually lived the inhumanity of the detention and abduction process. So first I'm going to just introduce them and then we'll get started. So Amilcar Valencia is the executive director of El Refugio. Amilcar is a native of La Libertad, El Salvador, and has been involved in the immigrant rights movement in Georgia since he arrived in the United States. He lives in Atlanta primarily. He's been helping people affected by immigrant detention since 2010 and is one of the founding coordinators of El Refugio's hospitality house that you'll hear about. He's an advisory board member of Alterna Community and a steering committee member of Georgia Detention Watch. He has the experience of working in nonprofit organizations, both in his native El Salvador and here in the United States. Previously worked for the Georgia Latino Alliance for Human Rights as a community organizer and a hotline intake manager, and is a graduate of the University of Central America in his native El Salvador. And then I will just tell you a little bit about Emily and Pedro, and we'll get going. So Emily has spent her career as a counselor, health educator, social worker, and therapist, working with African-American, LGBTQ, and Hispanic communities. In 2009, she became an immigrant rights activist herself when Pedro was detained by immigration authorities. And while she was fighting on that work for her family to be together, she began blogging, started a website, and really received a lot of national attention as an advocate. She is presently the Director of Diversity and Inclusion at North Carolina Central University here in Durham, a historically Black college and university, I guess historically Black university. And she was actually the first guest at El Refugio's original hospitality house in Lumpkin, Georgia. Pedro Guzman was born in Guatemala, raised in Mexico, and came to the United States when he was 8 years old. Has lived in California, Minnesota, and here in North Carolina. As you will hear, an error in Pedro's immigration case led to his abduction and detention by ICE, and he spent 18 months, most of it at the Stewart Detention Center in Lumpkin, Georgia. And he'll really give us insider's perspective on the realities at Stewart and other detention facilities like it around the country. We met a week ago and kind of organized the format for this. And so this is really a decision of the group. First, we're going to hear from Amilcar, who will give us an overview of the immigrant detention in the United States, specifically at Stewart Detention Center in Lumpkin, Georgia, and the role that the El Refugio Hospitality Ministry provides in that community. And then I'm going to do an interview after that with Emily and Pedro to share their story about how Pedro was ensnared in the immigration detention center, how Emily worked to stay connected with and advocate for him, and then how El Refugio supported her and and we'll hear a lot about what Pedro experienced firsthand. And then finally, we'll come back to Amilcar, who will conclude the panel with an update for you all, and really even for me, on the realities facing immigrants detained and their families during this horrible pandemic and what you can do to help. And then we'll reserve about 20 to 30 minutes at the end for Q&A for our panelists. So as you're hearing the panelists, feel free to drop questions into our chat function. And a member of our planning team will go through the chat to pose questions during the Q&A. We may not get to all those questions, so you'll have to give us moderators privilege to kind of figure out which ones are similar, which ones are most relevant, which ones didn't get answered. And that will be the conclusion. So with that, let's begin. So I'm going to turn the mic over to Amilcar, who will give us about a 10-minute overview of El Refugio and the community in Lumpkin, Georgia around the Stewart Detention Center.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ellen, for Randy, for these great introductions and for inviting me to be part of this panel together with Emily and Pedro. We met Pedro in 2010 when we started visitation at the Stewart Detention Center. We met Emily as well, and I'm so glad to be part of this conversation. At the same time, 10 years later, we're still here talking about the same issues that Pedro lived in detention. But we're here, and then we're glad to share some of the insights we have from the experiences that we have from meeting with people detained, their families, and assisting in the best we can. El Refugio, as I mentioned, was an organization that was founded in 2010 after a group of individuals from the Atlanta area, members of different congregations and other organizations were doing visits at the detention center. And I started to know and getting to know more about the conditions inside of the facility and the experiences of individuals held at this facility. It has been an opportunity it was an opportunity for us to connect with families specifically who were visiting their loved ones. And as you introduced Emily, Randy, we met families like Emily who were traveling many hours to get to the detention center for 1 hour visit a week. And through that experience, one of our founders, Anton Flores, had the idea of a hospitality house, a place where families can come and stay for free. And we offer meals, just an opportunity for them to stay closer to the facility and visit their loved ones. And that's how we founded El Refugio, and then became something a little more bigger with the years. So it's been a great privilege to be part of this organization and doing this ministry of hospitality. Ellen brought, I think, one important thing of the work that we do, that we're there for the people who are visiting their loved ones, that we're there, we're present, and that we do one simple thing, offering a place to stay. But that simple thing allow us to connect deeper with those who are facing the issue of having the loved ones in the detention center. We're gonna go to next slide, please, and then we're going to talk about the main goals of our organization. Is one, offering a place to stay, hospitality. This is the new house that you see in this picture that was donated in 2018 by Samantha B. But our old house is a small 3-bedroom house in Lumpkin, Georgia, a mile from the detention center. And throughout the years, we were able to do some work at the house and put in some love. And a lot of people spend nights and weekends in this facility. I think this picture below explains or says a lot about our ministry. We're a ministry of welcoming people. We offer a place to stay. We offer meals. We share a meal together with the families and hear their cries, their issues, their pain. As Emily and her family went to this deportation process, there are families who have loved ones who have been detained at the border, or they themselves are detained in the interior. and ended up, at this facility far, far away. So we see families who come from not only from the Carolinas, but families from Texas, families from New York, Maryland, and other places. And it's super isolated. It's far from the city. There are no hotels in this little town of Lumpkin. There is actually more people who live, who are detained than the actual population of the city of Lumpkin, just to give you an idea. The facility has capacity to detain about 2,000 people, and Lumpkin has about 1,300 people who lives in the facility. So let's go to the next slide, please. One of the things that we do is, we advocate, we provide assistance to the people. We started a new program, post-release program recently, and we also advocate for people's release from the detention facility and educate people in the public on immigration detention issues. For us, it's really important to talk about the language that we use when we refer to immigrants in detention. Instead of saying detainees, we use the word people in detention. Their status or their situation in detention doesn't define them, and that's sort of super important for us to name them as individuals, a person with human being, with rights and dignity. Avoiding the worthy immigrant language also important. Sometimes in our movement, we also talked about, some people came here and they are doctors and they have, college degrees. And then, by doing so, by elevating some folks, we're trying to diminish some of those who might not have the same abilities or came here in a different situation. And status also is important. Sometimes people talked about the immigration status. I came here legally. I came the right way. We wanted to ensure that everyone has, is here and came to the United States through their own means sometimes, and there is value on that they did an act of courage by migrating to the United States, sometimes looking for safety and protect themselves and their communities and families. Let's go to the next slide, please. So I won't go very deep in this one. Just it is important for us when we talk about immigration issues, we need to talk about or make the connections with our criminal justice system. So we're gonna mention a few things during our presentation. We're gonna talk about how broken our current immigration system is, and that specific connection with a system that fits into the detention of individuals. And the profits behind this that go to certain corporations that make money for the detention individuals, and also to learn more about how we can be better advocates for change and accompany those who are affected. Next slide, please. Again, we are in a system that is based in punishment, and when we see in the United States, that is one of the countries that incarcerates more people across the globe. The immigration detention issue is just another extension of that broken criminal justice system. We're not going to spend much time in this because our presentation on this is short, but just to mention, keep that in mind that we're talking about a whole system. That we are talking about a criminal justice system that is incarcerating Black and brown people, and the immigration system is part of that. Next slide, please. Who is detained? Asylum seekers, people who crossed the border recently, recent arrivals, people who are survivors of torture or human trafficking are being detained by the United States. This is something that the United States has done consistently since 1996. Before, people who were seeking asylum, seeking protection in the United States were not necessarily detained. They continue a process, but were not held in custody of immigration. Long-term residents who've been here in the United States for a long time, the families who've been here for 10 years or more, ended up, in the detention proceedings. They have, kids, roots in the community, part of, our congregations, our churches, and our active members in the community. They are incarcerated. and anyone who is, recent arrival as well. As I mentioned, parents or children are also being detained by the Immigration Customs Enforcement and CBP at the border. Next slide, please. Just to give you an idea, when we talk about immigration issues, sometimes we talk about, it might seem something that is like just a border issue, but immigration detention happens everywhere. And sometimes we have larger facilities like Stewart that has, a capacity to detain about, 2,000 people, or we have small localities, counties, city jails that have a direct connection with ICE and cooperation directly with ICE, so they can detain people and hold people for immigration purposes. So that basically happens everywhere. There is more than 200 facilities across the United States, and that includes private facilities and government-run facilities in the United States. And if you look closer, there is a locality nearby that has a direct collaboration with ICE or is in the business of detaining people. Next slide, please. This is just to give you an idea, again, the increase of detention. Since 1994, the United States was detaining about, less than 6,000 people. And if you can see the peak here in 2018, more than 50,000 or close to 50,000 people detained daily by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. There are several things here that we won't explain, but you can see some peaks in 2001, and then you can, we can talk about that in terms of what happened at that time. This is a specific peak, 9/11. There also 28070 program that was basically started to target people for immigration purposes. And that happened between 2007 and 2008. And of course, during 2008, 2014, there was a huge increase of detention. We're going to talk more about this later on, and we'll give you a quick update on what is the statistics of detention today, during COVID. But just to say that we had come a long way since 1996 to 2018, and a lot of people have been through these deportation proceedings with immigration. Next slide. We can go to the next one. Thank you. And this is just to give you also an idea, the cost of detention and the numbers of how many people have been detained, at least since 2016, 2015. Last year, there was an average population daily under immigration custody of 50,000 people. And that, $192 were spent for every person detained. That represented more than $3.5 billion in the detention and removal proceedings. That doesn't include USCIS process or anything. This is just immigration detention proceedings and deportation. So it's a huge amount of money that has been channeled to the industry of detention. As you can see, we can go to the next one because I think that it's also tied to the last one. Private companies make money for the detention of individuals. There are two main players, Geo Group and CoreCivic. There are other small companies that are in the business of detaining people. Stewart is run by CoreCivic, is operated by CoreCivic. They recently rebranded from detention from CCA, Correction Corporation of America, to CoreCivic. And this facility makes, this corporation makes a lot of money by the detention of individuals. They are in the, again, as I mentioned, in the business of detaining people. So their intensive, their incentive is detain more people, have more beds available, have more space available for the detention of individuals. And our government and Congress has given them that ability to make profit of the detention of immigrants in our community. Immigrant detention facilities, lack of oversight. Immigration has what they call immigration detention standards. But the problem with the standards is that they are not legally binded or codified. So facilities like Stewart, you know, they have violations of the standards, access issues, access to counsel, many issues, medical neglect. 4 people have died at Stewart, and yet this facility, sorry, 5 people have died in Stewart, and yet this facility continues to operate like normal businesses. So the standards are not legally binded. So they're not providing an oversight. ICE is not an agency that provides an oversight to the facility. And in many cases, Congress has failed to provide proper oversight to facilities like Port Civic and Stewart Detention Center. So there is more information here. We're gonna run quickly to these ones. We can go to the next one. So what's wrong with immigration detention? The main thing here is that immigrants are being detained when there are, you know, less costly alternatives to detention. And the last, you know, one of the less costly alternatives to detention, you know, is just releasing people to their communities, to their family, to their sponsors. And we should not be in the need to detain people. And also, it's important to mention that immigrants detained most times, you know, we have or the government has made us to believe that immigrants are detained because they had to detain. You know, they committed crimes, so they had to detain. The reality of immigration detention is that people deserve to be back with their families and their communities. The immigration offenses, in most cases, is just that, a civil offense, cross the border without an inspection or didn't have the proper documentation, but been here for a long time and have roots in the community. And that doesn't amount with the punishment that people live while they are in detention. And if they don't have good advocates like Emily and family members and community members, people ended up deported, and their families, everything stays here. Their lives are completely destroyed. So that's why I think
Looks like we might have lost Amikar here. We'll hope that he comes back online.
I'm here, and then
Oh,
we
there he
can
goes.
just, yeah.
Excellent.
I'm
Continue,
not sure
please,
what
Amikar.
happened. Yeah, so, I mean, the last thing I will say here is that most Americans, people recognize that we're a country of immigrants, that that this country was built by immigrants. And that narrative is, a lot of people believes that. But when it comes to protecting those more vulnerable in our communities, we just don't uphold those values, moral values, and in our obligation to protect those who are most directly impacted. If we talk about communities here, if we talk about those who just arrive here, who are asylum seekers, in most cases, our government has a lot to do of the crisis that people live in Central America and other parts of the world, and then we should be able to assist and welcome those who are fleeing violence and persecution, because as I said, we have something to do there. Many people come to United States, and there is a saying in the community that we are here because you were there, and because their lives and our lives in our countries have been destroyed by our policies as well. So I'm gonna go to the next slide, and I think we're gonna transition to Emily. We'll talk just briefly about Stewart. Stewart is one of the largest immigration detention centers in the United States. I mentioned in the beginning, it has the capacity to detain about 2,000 people. And it is about 2.5 hours from the city of Atlanta. If you are from Durham, it takes you, 6 or 8 hours to get here. And the conditions inside of the facility is something that, Emily and Pedro will talk more about this. So we're gonna go to the next slide. So you have a picture of the facility, and the location is very close to the Alabama border. So we can go to the next slide and maybe transition to Pedro's testimony. I mentioned before, CoreCivic is the corporation that owns Stewart Detention Center. And 2 points here, and 94% of the people detained at Stewart have no legal representation, which is a super high number. In 2015, 98.2% of the immigrants detained at Stewart lost their case. There are many reasons for that. One of the reasons being, how far it is from the city, the lack of pro bono representation, the lack of representation in general, and many, many other issues at the facility. So I'm gonna pass it on to Randy to continue the interview with Emily and Pedro.
Thank you, Amilcar, and thank you for sharing that. Just one thing I'll add, having been to Stewart a year ago, is that for those of us who think of the judicial system as the third branch of government, that's not the case at Stewart or at any immigration system. The judges in the immigration system are actually appointed by the government, and they're often former prosecutors, and they work for the Justice Department. So it is not an impartial adjudication, which I think is an important thing for those of us who think that the Constitution creates these three equal branches. So if we could jump forward a couple slides and bring Pedro and Emily up on the video, that would be great. Excellent. Welcome, Emily and Pedro. So as I said before, we're going to do this a little bit as a Q&A. I've actually never met Pedro in person. We met on video last week. Emily and I met 1.5 years ago, as I mentioned, when we were arrested together and drove to the county court together. So some of this is new to me, and I hope it's a story that will just remind you of how personal this can get. So the first thing I want to make sure we share, Emily, can you tell us why Pedro was detained?
Yeah, so Pedro came to the United States when he was 8 years old with his mother. And he, at that point, a few years after that, she applied for what's called NACARA, which is a type of asylum. Then fast forward many years later, she went to apply for permanent residency. I believe it was in 2006 or 2007. And we made the mistake as a whole entire family of not sending a lawyer with her. At that point, she didn't speak English really well, and she made a mistake in the interview and was denied permanent residency. We did not realize that would affect Pedro at that point. She actually decided to go ahead and retire in Mexico. She did not want to fight the case. She could have. She had the right to appeal, but she chose not to at that point. And then fast forward a few years later, they sent Pedro a order to appear in court because he was actually apparently under her case, which we did not know. And they sent it to the wrong address. Even though they had our address, Pedro had applied for a work visa since he was a young teenager and got approved every year. They sent that order to appear in court to the wrong address. He, of course, did not appear because he didn't know about it. And so at that point got an order of deportation sent to the wrong address again. And then we didn't find out that he had that order until his work visa was denied.
Mhm.
So, Pedro, if you share with us the morning where you were detained, what happened that day? How did ICE present itself to you? How were you aware you were going to be taken?
Well, that morning came and it was, we started normal in the morning, you know, like doing a regular routine around the house. You know, we were basically gathering some boxes because we were basically going to do some donation to Goodwill, you know, and I was loading up the car with the boxes and bags. And it was around early in the morning that, you know, but we had already had a visit the weekend, like on a Friday before by then. And that's basically when they came in early in the morning, like around 4:30, 5 o'clock in the morning with flashlights, surrounded both of the street, the front and the back of the house. And they basically, you know, had about five different vehicles parked in the front. And I mean, like like really unsurreal. Like if I was like, you know, the American Most Wanted, they were really like searching the house. They crossed over the fence, walked around the backyard, and trying to make themselves in. And that morning, we were basically, you know, just on our way to donate some stuff.
The next Monday.
Yeah, the next Monday, we're pretty much on the way to donate some stuff, and unexpectedly, you know, they just came out of nowhere, and I was in the back, and one of the agents came back to me and said, "Are you Pedro Guzman?" And of course, I, you know, immediately knew what was happening. I responded, "Yes." He had a folder with my picture on it, and then he said, "Okay, come with me." And from the moment the nightmare began, and they arrested me and pretty much put me in handcuffs. And at that moment, they were pretty much ready to head out and pretty much, you know, get out of there, out of the location, and take me in. And then, of course, you know, Emily pretty much came out and rushed, you know, see if there's anything else she could do, you know, was screaming and yelling if they can, you know, wait a second, explain what's going on, and allow them to allow me to say goodbye to my son. That was pretty important to us. But yeah, I mean, it was scary, unexpected. I mean, we still, you know, consider there was, you know, they could have definitely been in many worse situations, but yeah, that was one of the worst situations that I found myself in, probably, you know, our whole family found ourselves into.
And on Friday, they identified themselves as police.
Right.
Although we knew better and we did not open the door. Yeah, so that's how we avoided them on the Friday, because we knew that they couldn't enter without a warrant. And then on Monday, he was taken. And it's only because of my English speaking and my white privilege that he was able to kiss his almost 3-year-old son goodbye at that point.
Yeah.
That's hard to imagine. Emily, what were those next days like for you and your son after Pedro was detained? What did you do, and how did you even know where Pedro was?
So I asked them at the time where they were taking him, and they said they would be taking him to Wake County Jail, which at the time, you know, this was 2008. 2009, sorry, yes, 2009. So at that point, Wake County still had a 287G agreement with ICE. So he was taken there. They told me he was going to be taken there, but I said, you know, how will I know, you know, how will I communicate with him? And they said he would call me. But at that point, I was just frantically calling lawyers, trying to figure out what to do. And luckily, I had a good friend that ended up staying with me that week. Quickly after that, he was transferred after only one day. I think he spent one night.
It was overnight
at Wake County Jail, yeah. And then was transferred to Alamance County, and spent a month there. The horrendous part about Alamance County Jail is that It's actually a TV system for visiting with family members. And I took my son that first day because I wanted him to be able to see his dad. He had been a stay-at-home dad with Logan for that whole entire year before. So they were very close, and he didn't understand what was going on, even though I did my best to explain it to him. So we tried to go visit him, and luckily my friend went with me, but we went in and it was just a TV, and my son said, I don't, where's daddy? I don't want to see a TV. Where's daddy? And he flipped out. It was so traumatic for him. And I passed him off to my best friend, hearing his wails in the waiting room while still trying to talk to Pedro and explaining, we got the lawyer, and trying to, make sure that neither of us were panicking, even though I was panicking on the inside. But he was there for an entire month, and I tried to go at least once a week, but I went on my own because it was just too much for Logan. After that, he was transferred to Stewart Detention Center.
Gainesville.
Oh, you're right. North Georgia Detention Center first, which I believe does not exist anymore. And he stayed there for a month. It was
3 weeks.
3 weeks.
3 weeks.
I drove 5 hours there and 5 hours back to see him there. And then in November, it was September when he was detained for the first time. November, he was transferred to Stewart Detention Center. So the idea for ICE is for them to transfer the person as quickly as possible. So it's hard to get a lawyer. It's hard to communicate with family members. Family members don't know where their loved one is. And so he was isolated away from us and away from any lawyers. And that's, why Stewart is far away even from Atlanta. And if you think about how lawyers, they bill by the hour, so they don't have very much reason to want to drive 2.5 hours there, 2.5 hours back, to actually represent people. And plus, they make it pretty much impossible to even find a lawyer or afford a lawyer. So,
So Pedro, you spent almost 1.5 years, it sounds like, in the detention center at Stewart. What was your day like? How did you pass the time?
Mainly most what I did, I kept myself busy, entertained. I read a lot of magazine, books, and, helped a lot of detainees, pass a message to their families, whatever they needed as far as basically finding where they were, and how to build the network they can talk to the families and the loved ones. I was willing to, pretty much help them, and, on any kind of form they needed filled out. If it was a form to send to medical, if it was something about their case, I will, look up something, research something. And mainly most of the time it was just basically keep myself healthy and good spirit, and, and try to keep people around me that will be positive and staying focused on, on staying out of trouble, and not get involved with anything that was basically, easy to get himself in trouble in there. And of course, main thing is looking forward for those visits from Emily and Logan and family and friends, and the visits that the at Refugee was providing. It was really, keep me calm, and it helped a lot as far as, interacting with someone else besides the other people that being, in detention center and the staff. It was just basically, try to find myself in good spirit that I can help others and help myself with it at the same time, and help Emily, keep her sanity going.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Pedro. How did you get access to reading material? Was that stuff, did they have a library, or did Emily have to send you stuff, or a little bit of both?
Yes, they did have a library. However, the books, they were pretty much, pretty old. He couldn't really, pick up something that was actually, a good read. But yes, Emily found a way to, she, through the bring Pedro home, they were able to, send me books, the group, the church group, and anybody basically, that she basically give the information where it was, family and friends that started sending me books, magazines. So what I would do, I would basically, like have other people being, in the same detention, I will basically hand them out and say, hey, here's a book, maybe you can keep you entertained, for a couple of hours. So I will do my share, and then of course I will, keep myself entertained with them as well. And
He became the library.
yeah,
The good library.
yeah,
They only allowed the publisher or Amazon to send the books.
That's
and
right.
So I basically I'd make a kind of a wish list, and I sent some, and a whole bunch of other people sent some to him, and he the other men in there called him El Abogado, the lawyer, and the workers in there, actually they'd call him the congressman because he was always trying to mediate the situation and keep everybody calm and things like that. So
yeah.
But he was also the librarian. He handed out the books and gave people.
I had many hats in
information.
there. I had many hats. I mean, to supplying, with shampoo and soap and, a towel, or giving haircuts and, making feel better for a day. I mean, I wore a couple of different other hats.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Made a difference for other folks who didn't have as much support. So Emily, so with no traffic, Lumpkin's about an 8.5 hour drive from where you live still.
It's really, really closer to 9, really.
Yeah.
If, because you have to drive through Atlanta. We're all the way in Durham. So, yeah.
So what was it like to visit Pedro at Stewart? How often were you able to do that?
Right. So I tried to go there about at least every 3 months. I tried to go more often than that, but it was a 9-hour drive with, at that point, a 3-year-old by myself. And it was really hard to drive all that way and get there. And before El Refugio was in existence, I would have to find a hotel in a surrounding town. And I remember the first night we found a hotel, there were deer heads everywhere, and it was almost like a hunting lodge. And Logan was confused, and it was very weird after a long drive. And once El Refugio existed, we at least had, hugs and warm welcomes and food, and not having to worry about any of that made such a difference.
Oh, yeah.
But visiting Pedro, they wouldn't allow anything in the waiting room. In the visiting rooms, no toys for Logan, nothing. And you had to dress a certain way, and you would wait for a long time, and there were only vending machines in there. And so a lot of the kids would get all sugared up, including Logan, because they were bored. They asked for candy. The parents were trying to keep them calm. I was trying to keep Logan calm. And then you would walk through, the metal detectors and get back there. And then you have glass between you and a telephone only. We couldn't touch each other. And it was very hard, but Pedro is an amazing dad, and he made it fun for Logan. They would, shoot pretend spider webs to each other and play hide and seek between, with glass in between them. He would make toys and out of paper and play with them and stuff. And but it was very painful. It was very hard to watch him back there, and to watch Logan just try to be with his dad with glass between them.
So You and I've talked about this a little bit. How, and Pedro, I think you've shared some light on this, but how different was your family's experience as the family member of a person who had been detained because you were a U.S. citizen who was white, who was a native English speaker? How did that compare?
Yeah, so a lot of the family members don't speak English. Some of them are bilingual, but a lot of them don't speak English. Many of them are not white. And because of my white privilege and my English speaking privilege, I was able to advocate for him, for myself, for my family. And not everybody has that privilege. And so that's one of the reasons why we did our best to help out any families that we could. Me from the outside, using my phone to call family members and break the news that their family member was detained, and doing my best to explain, how to transfer money or how to, get a deportation bag to their loved one, and what to do if you didn't have papers, but you wanted to visit, could you go and be safe, and things like that. So I was safe with my US citizenship, to go in there and not feel afraid that I wouldn't come out. And so my experience was very different than many other experiences. Plus, as you saw Amilcar say, that 95% of those people, I think that's right, 95% of those people that go in there don't come out, unless they're being deported. So that's horrible.
Just one personal vignette. The day we visited Stewart, we went to the courtroom at the beginning, and there was an immigrant from India who was having his deportation hearing, and the translator, who's being piped in over a loudspeaker from somewhere else in the country, translating for the judge, and it was a final deportation order, and the judge said, "Do you understand that you are agreeing to being voluntarily deported? We will pay for you to fly back to India." And the plea in his voice was so profound that he desperately wanted to get deported because he couldn't stand to be in that place another day.
Yeah.
I thought that was really
Yeah.
The circumstances are so torturous that you actually so many people would rather get deported voluntarily, where at least the government paid your trip, than to have to endure that.
And not only that, but they brought the deportation papers all prepared to Pedro so many times, just saying, you could be free now. You just need to sign right here on this X and you can be free today. And it's so manipulative. It's so manipulative. And I had to, keep his hope up for him to be able to just keep going. Yeah, it was pretty horrible.
Pedro, tell us about your final court date. What happened? How did you ultimately get out?
Well, we were nervous, from the night before. I mean, the upcoming week, we were nervous, up in the air, if it's going to happen, if it's going to be successful. We just didn't know how well it was going to go, because we have been shut down and rescheduled or canceled, or there was no, no hearing at all. I mean, it was kind of like, like, if it's gonna happen, not gonna happen, how is it gonna go? So we were like in a roller coaster, but at the same time, it's like what you just said a minute ago. We came at peace, Emily and I, we have discussed, the night before, like, whatever happens. We have put up a fight that, it basically, it opened some eyes, raised some red flags, and whatever happens, we didn't give up that easy. We were at peace. If the decision that was not in our favor, we were just gonna go ahead and, move on with our life. I have this moment. We were both, pretty much in a point of our life that we were basically, ready to close the Stewart chapter, and move on with the life, whatever the outcome was for that decision to come, and just move on. I mean, we have already spent so much money and, and time, effort,
emotional effort,
and emotional drain.
Yeah.
I mean, from the moment for the moment I stepped foot, in the Wake Forest facility, I was like, I didn't know how long it was gonna last, and for me to be going for that long is dreadful for me, for her, and everybody around us. And at the time when that happened, we just didn't know how it was if it was gonna be a court date, and how it was gonna be playing out, and we were just ready. And when it happened, it was a beautiful feeling.
So we had probably had like 20 court dates canceled, and that's the part that's crazy making about Stewart, is that they'll give you a court date and cancel, and give you a court date and cancel, give you a bond hearing, deny you go appeal, you're denied again, then another court date and it's canceled. It's torture. It's complete torture. And so we finally got to that court date. And the three of us, me and Pedro and my mom, we testified. We had to testify of Pedro's good moral character and also prove extreme hardship.
Mm-hmm.
And so we poured out our souls on the stand. Again, because I could speak English, because
Right.
Pedro could speak English, because there was no translator, there was more emotional connection. And so the whole courtroom was in tears after we all testified, and they approved his asylum, and we were overjoyed. And then the government attorney appealed it and said, no, we're going to appeal it. And so he couldn't even be released after all of those days.
Right.
But then the next day, thank God, he was released.
It was very emotional.
Can't imagine. Well, thank you for sharing that. This is, again, even for someone who's heard part of this story, this is really quite remarkable resilience. I want to bring, if the folks could bring Amilcar back in. Amilcar, can you just share with us an update, and then we'll take some questions from the audience for all three of you on kind of what's going on in the world of the pandemic, what's the impact, and what can folks do specifically to support the community during this time. Got about 5 minutes maybe for that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you, Pedro and Emily, for sharing your experience. It's deeply appreciated for everything you shared today, and all the things that you went through to keep your family together, and fighting against this horrendous system that is doing everything they can to separate us, because we are born in a different country. So thank you for your testimony. Quickly, the conditions inside the detention center had been always bad. We didn't have much time to talk about these things, but there is like many reports. If you Google Stewart, recent reports about the abuses and the condition, medical neglect, and the treatment of people detained at the facility. During COVID, of course, this has changed and has amplified those abuses and the lack of medical attention and things like that. The nationwide, the population has decreased. I mentioned in part of my presentation that we've been detaining as a country more than 50,000 people detained in some cases, as it is for 2019. But during COVID, there has been a significant reduce of the population in custody right now. That doesn't mean that immigration is stopping deportations or is stopping, the people who they're booking into the process for deportation proceedings. But the current population right now has decreased for about 41%. For COVID, ICE, according to ICE, they have tested, close to, more than 16,000 people in detention centers nationwide. This is as to July 19. 3,657 people have tested positive for COVID. So 22% of the people who were tested tested positive. At Stewart, and we'll talk about Stewart in a minute, but the way how ICE is reporting the data and the issues related to COVID is very obscure. If you go to their website, you see the numbers are, it's hard to find the data. According to predictions and some statistics and simulations through the Bering Institute, they predicted that if you take into consideration all the people that came to the system, about 66,000 people since the first case of COVID in March 17, there is actually 15 times higher the number of positive cases for COVID than what ICE is currently reporting. I think that's a very important thing to know. In the beginning of the pandemic, ICE was not giving any information. They were hiding everything, and they were not testing people in detention. And then we know that because we have records of communication with loved ones, communications from people who are detained. Many reports. I was looking in our own report. This is just for Stewart, and then we have 213 reports related to COVID since March 14. So people who said I am sick, I had these symptoms, I had COVID symptoms, I've been, with other folks in the facility who are the same, or my unit who have the same symptoms. So that's the reality of, the situation currently at the detention centers. We go to the next slide, and then this is for Stewart. Specifically, 116 people have tested positive for COVID, and this is as July 19. So it's 116 people at Stewart. 55 employees tested positive for COVID as well. 2 ICE staff have also tested positive, and 1 person died at Stewart because COVID-related symptoms. Mr. Santiago Bateng Oslac died on March 24, a Guatemalan citizen, was younger than me, and we've been in contact with his family and how destroyed they are because of he went to this facility, was taken into custody, and the days before he passed, they plead to ICE to release him and said, it doesn't matter if, whatever happened to him, they knew that he had COVID. We want him to die with us. He died at the hospital on May 24th. This is the second case of people who had died because of COVID at Stewart. There is a third case of another person who died recently in another facility, not related to COVID, but, you basically can say everything that every person who is dying during this pandemic, even if they didn't have the virus, a lot of things had to do with the current pandemic and ICE activity during COVID-19. So it's just a quick update for Stewart. We're going to go to the next slide, and I think we're going to stop there and then go to some questions. I can remember my presentation, but what we know is that it is impossible for people to distance themselves. Social distancing is impossible in a detention setting. Now that we know that the virus is an airborne, how you can contain that in a facility where you have a lot of people in pods, 60 people in the same room. This is just something that we advocate in Atlanta, Georgia, and across the United States. Call directly to ICE when we learn about the COVID was inside of the detention facilities, and they did not listen any of the concerns that people have, the community had about the virus. And now we're facing the consequences, and a lot of people are tested positive for that. Medical care and medical neglect is also that we hear all the time. Of those 216 calls we had, like specifically COVID reports that we got from people detained and families. Many of them are related to we don't have the attention. We fill the report to or the card to request to see the doctor, and sometimes we never see them. We never see them. I talked to a person who said, I had COVID symptoms. I made the call. I wanted to see the doctor. I wanted they to take me to the medical unit. My symptoms passed. 2 days later, 2 weeks later, some of the symptoms came back. I'm still haven't seen the doctor. That's the words from someone that I talked to who called our line. Some people had told us that they don't have, and especially during the beginning, they didn't have any access to PPE or hygiene products. They had to buy the soap. They had to, some of them made some masks with towels, and they were retaliated against because they did that. Retaliation also happened in this facility because people were, protesting that many people are sick in this facility. We want, to speak to our officers and wanted to see if we can be released from the facility. A group of people, in a very peaceful way, wrote freedom, a sign of freedom. They put it beside the bed, and because of that, they give them 30 days of solitary confinement. People were pepper sprayed in this facility. Rubber bullets were thrown to them. Gas bombs were thrown to people because they were demanding to be treated as human beings, and because they were saying, "We're gonna die here." And person that I spoke with said, "I felt today. I fainted today. I don't know what happened, and it happened to me the other day. I asked for attention. I did not receive the attention." The same day, another person called us and said, the person you just talked was taken in an emergency ambulance to the hospital. And that's the reality of what people are currently facing in the detention center right now. Transfers continue to happen. If you go to, we can provide also the slides. If you go to the Bear Institute that I mentioned before, they have a map actually of all the transfers that happen, like visual, and you can see that transfer happen, within the Georgia facilities, but then from Louisiana to Stewart and from other facilities across the United States, and that's how the virus get into the facility. And then issues with providing medical attention and food are the biggest issues. Lack of funds. Sometimes people are in lockdown because of somebody protested, somebody wanted to get attention, and everyone is in lockdown, and they take away their rights for take the phone calls from their loved ones.
Milka, we've gotten a couple questions on how folks can help. I know I think you've got a slide on that.
Yeah.
You wouldn't mind sharing that in particular?
Definitely. So this is what our Refugee have been doing. Of course, our hospitality house is closed because COVID, but we've been super busy because of those calls we get from people and finding other ways to assist them. We've been sending letters of support to people just so they know that they're not alone, that they're not forgotten, that there is a community outside that supports them. So, we also have ramped up our pen pal program. So we are paying volunteers with people detained. We have sent money or deposited money into a commissary and phone accounts, and have provided that service for them so they can call their loved ones or supplement their meals from commissary. We also have assisted their families who are also struggling. As you know, immigrants' families, undocumented families are not getting assistance from the government during COVID. And they are many of them work on essential workers and are not receiving any support from the government. So we've been assisting some of them with family solidarity packages to them, and it has some of the kits that you see here in the picture, sectional items, gift cards. and things like that for the loved ones who are struggling with, paying rents and things like that, and also providing, a list of resources in their community that can provide more assistance to them. We've been advocating for the release of people. I'm going to go very deep in this, but just to say that we have, advocated directly and sent in a specific request, a FRIHAT request, which is a class action lawsuit filed by SPLC. We were part of that, and through that action, basically, ICE has obligated to review particular cases of people who are vulnerable for COVID to redetermine their custody. And then we have sent those requests directly of the people that we know. And we continue to do those things. We have sent a letter to the CDC, to the Georgia Department of Public Health, to ICE, to Congress. So we have done a lot of things to advocate for people's release and for their treatment inside of the facility. This is next slide is just to answer the question about what you can do. So you can become a pen pal for people in detention, and you can contact me and we can give you more information about that. You can donate to a Refugee so we can continue depositing funds to people in commissary accounts and phone accounts so they can call their loved ones, and we also can continue supporting their families with the solidarity packages. You can also pick up your phone, send emails to your representatives and talk to them about immigration detention today, and that they have the power to investigate what's happening inside of this facility, and they demand that ICE release people from detention. They can do that. So it's a very easy thing to do. Just contact your member of Congress and ask them to advocate for immigrants currently in custody. We also provide orientations like this. So if anyone else would like to invite us, to do a presentation like this with their group, we're happy to support in that way.
Thank you, Amilcar. It's a really remarkable organization on a shoestring budget, having a huge impact for folks in this horrible system. So we've got about 7 or 8 minutes for questions. So if we could bring Emily and Pedro back on screen, and then Toby, if you don't mind opening up your line and just throwing out questions, and I'll direct them to our panelists for brief answers.
And I also want to encourage people, if you have any other questions, to put them in the chat. One of the questions that I think Emily and Pedro have not answered yet is, somebody asked, is there any chance that Pedro could be detained again?
We're both very traumatized by what happened. Pedro has nightmares about Stuart. I'd say at least once a month.
Yeah.
And so we always have a fear in the back of our mind, whether he could be detained and stripped of his citizenship, because thank God he does have U.S. citizenship now. It's been 2 years since he got his citizenship. But I know Trump had said things about taking people's citizenship if they had certain things on their record. And so we'll always have that fear. I don't think that will ever go away. And it is possible.
Okay, thank you. Another question is, I think people have been talking about 2 kinds of support. I think there's kind of support that can be provided to people in detention through El Refugio or other organizations. But what about, other than the solidarity kits, what do you recommend in terms of supporting people who are not in detention, but family members? Like you talked about having a support system, Emily, and it sounds like you built one up. But what if you all, everybody on the panel, recommend that people can do to support people who are at home with a member of their family at Stewart or another detention center.
Amilcar, you want to take a quick stab at that?
Sure. I think Emily could do a better job at
Right.
and Pedro too. But I just want to say that meet your neighbors. You know, who are your neighbors, and that can be, you know, in your, you know, actual neighborhood or people in your community who are at risk of being detained by immigration. You know, look for those organizations in your community that are supporting the community, the undocumented community, those who again are in the you know, dangers of being taken in custody by immigration, and provide support. Become a good neighbor to them. Provide support to them. Sometimes people need, you know, just to, you know, establish a relationship with immigrant community, and I think that'll be one important thing that you could do. Everything starts with, you know, a friendly conversation, you know, with just, you know, the interest on the things that they're going through, their support, you know, through your work, school, what is it that you do, make sure that you advocate for people as well, and give them the opportunity to get to know you as well. So,
Emily or Pedro, anything you would add?
I was just thinking about, there's definitely organizations in the Triangle in North Carolina and likely in other areas where you can actually identify checkpoints and take pictures so that people are made aware if there's an ICE checkpoint, or so that people are less likely to get detained and become a part of the system. Also, there's different bond funds out there that I think one of the hardest parts we probably spent, I don't even know, but we're guessing around $40,000 in lawyers' fees. Pedro was detained for 597 days. And most immigration lawyers charge by the hour. So if you can find immigrant bond funds, you know, donating to different areas that are specifically around providing, you know, help, legal help.
Like a foundation funding site.
Yeah.
Can I just add one more thing? I think it would be important to, you know, to protect immigrant communities. You know, everyone is saying, or many people in our community are saying, freedom and all, and yes, we want people to be free and go to our communities. However, you know, bond funds is the way how we can get people free from detention. The other thing is that we need sponsors. We need people who are willing to take on a family or someone who is currently in custody, who might be released, but their loved ones are not, you know, U.S. citizens, will have a status, and need a sponsor, someone in the community who can say to ICE, I will take care of this person. I will make sure that this person continues the process. If anyone is interested in that process, we can talk more about that offline. But that's one of the great ways on how you can make an impact and support immigrants in your community who might be in the situation of having a loved one detained and cannot be released because they can find someone to sponsor them.
So I think Toby may have time for one quick question, and then we'll wrap it up.
I was going to just say that a number of people have been posting in the chat, some organizations in the Triangle area of North Carolina. Siembra NC runs an ICE verification program, and so people who suspect that ICE is somewhere, there's a whole network of people who've been trained who then go out to verify, is it ICE, and then that's communicated out to the community. And there's a number of other organizations there and places where people can donate money. And so what we'll be doing is we'll send out a kind of sheet afterwards that has some of these organizations and contacts, but we know there's other people in here who are not in the Triangle of North Carolina. So I encourage people who are in other areas to post organizations in your area that provide that sort of either bond funds or support. There's Church World Service here has a fund that can give money to families who are struggling financially. And so post those things in there and we'll get them out to people as well who are helping to provide support to people in the immigrant community, especially now with COVID and in general. So.
Thanks, Toby. Just one other point and then we'll close. In Amilcar's map, you saw pins all over the country, and Emily and Pedro talked about county detention centers that were collaborating with ICE. One of the things that you can do is just use your right as a voter, if you've got that privilege, to change your leadership. So the first place Pedro went was the Wake County Detention Center, which as recently as a year and a half ago was still collaborating with ICE, and the voters of that county changed the sheriff. And one of the main reasons was that the person running against him for office committed to stop collaborating with ICE. So I think we had something like 4 counties in North Carolina that changed sheriffs in the 2018 fall elections who had been collaborating with ICE. So it doesn't mean somebody won't ultimately get to Lumpkin, but it at least sends a signal to local leaders to not collaborate. So that's one way for us to make a difference. The 287G program that Amilcar mentioned in his presentation is that program where county sheriffs collaborate with ICE to serve as interim detention facilities. I just want to really thank Pedro and Emily for sharing your story. I really literally cannot imagine going through that myself. And so thank you for being willing to share that so that other people, we can do the work that it takes to make it so that fewer families are separated the way yours was. So special thanks to you. Thank you to Amilcar, who I'm sure has done this presentation a couple of hundred, if not a couple thousand times over the last few years, for taking the time away from your own family this evening to share with folks across the country. I want to also thank those of you who participated tonight. It's wonderful to be in solidarity with folks around the country from different faiths, from different communities on these issues. And then just a special personal appreciation for a really wonderful group of staff and volunteers and partners at Judea Reformed Congregation who've spent a number of weeks organizing this. So as you see on the screen, we've got 2 more panels coming up over the next month as part of this series. First, why we say never again on Tuesday the 8th, and then organizing for dignity and fair wage around organizing in that area. And so if you can join us, we hope you will be able to do so. I hope this has been a productive session for you. Do watch your email for more info. As Toby mentioned, we'll get some info out to folks who participated in this and ways for you to support El Refugio specifically. And as Toby mentioned, to look for other organizations in your community that you can support. So that is it for this evening. Again, many thanks to those of you all over the country who participated, and a special thank you to our panelists. And just please be safe in every way that you can out there and take care of yourselves. Thank you to everyone, and hope you all have a wonderful rest of the evening and a safe, joyous weekend. Thank you all.
Thank you.